one of expectations that I think John Adams had during his coming into his presidency, as we talked about a little bit before, about, here's this great figure in Washington, and now you're going to succeed him. Are there any parallels that we can learn from as citizens looking at this through the lens of history, but also the expectations surrounding a potential Kamala Harris presidency as the first female president? That's some heavy stuff, folks. I don't care how you cut it. Okay, first Black president, totally get it. Yeah, big deal, Obama. This, for me, feels different when it comes to that sense of expectation. When you consider how this country still looks at women.
Yeah.
Just to put it in blunt terms.
Yeah.
Glass ceiling. It is like.
Yeah. So what was the first part of the question?
For those of you who are listening to this in your car, you should see, I'm going to describe the face Lindsay just gave in trying to, posit that question in her head. It was more like, okay, what the hell am I going to do with this one? And where do I go? Because, I need something stronger in my water than water right now.
Yeah, this is not a water question. So first, in terms of what we can learn as citizens, the lesson that I really took away from writing this book is that in moments of crises, we don't need military heroicism or incredible genius. We just need people to put the Constitution above their own partisan interests.
Ah, damn, there it is right there. Yep.
I know. And the people who often did so in this book that made such a huge difference are not necessarily even names we remember. I mean, of course, there are the ones that we do, the Hamiltons, the Adams, the Jeffersons, but they're congressmen that were in their 30s and 40s that were willing to make compromises for the good of the Constitution. And that really made all of the difference, which maybe sounds like a big ask, but I don't think it should be. But
you have the same question today. Think about those moments after, the Mueller case and impeachment trials aside, but this insurrection on January 6th, which led to the second impeachment of President Trump, those members of Congress, particularly the U.S. Senate, that saw the evidence and did not stand in the breach on behalf of the Constitution and the American people, but took the selfish way out and said, that's fine, that's okay. I mean, when you say that about those members of Congress who at various points in time had to put the country, this fledgling enterprise, ahead of their own personal political salvation or gain.
Yeah.
That's a very compelling story or thread that seems to run throughout many moments in our history.
It does, and it has come up at crises after crisis, and it has not been a partisan thing. It has been demonstrated to be a bipartisan act, which I define this as civic virtue, the willingness to put the Constitution above your own political goals. The example that gets bandied about a lot right now is the Republicans' role in making Nixon resign. That was civic virtue. It was putting the Constitution above their own political party. I should also note that, not that many years later, Reagan came into office, so the party did just fine. So it doesn't have to be the, forever end of political aspirations. But so it has been something that both parties have demonstrated. It is essential to the survival of the nation. It is the lesson that I would want people to take from this book. Transitioning that to Harris in terms of the expectations. I mean, I do think you're right. I think there's something unique because we see leadership in male terms. We code leadership in male terms.
That's exactly right.
And so,
to that point, you know how just, I don't want to throw you off your point you're going to make, but it just real quick, saying that we see leadership in male terms. I can't tell you the number of people on my Twitter feed or who will send me text, people inside the Republican Party, of which I'm still a member, much to their consternation. And they will say, Does she own any dresses? And I'm like, excuse me? Why does she always wear pants? And so I'm sitting there, I'm thinking,
Well, first of all, they tend to have pockets, which are really useful.
which are really useful. Men figured that out a long time ago. That's how we have pockets.
It's really helpful.
And we've saddled women with these like straight things that they can't put stuff in.
Also, other show business note, if you're going to have a microphone on you, having a jacket is really helpful because you need something a lapel to clip it to. You need a pocket to hide the wires. So if you are going to be mic'd up, it's really nice to wear.
Women do not appreciate having men run wires up and down their back of their dresses or sometimes down to
and you
their
often have to have it
stuff.
taped. Do you know what it's like to have like tape on your chest? That's not fun. That's not fun.
But I just wanted to just give some context to why this, this moment is bigger than I think we really fully appreciate, because we do continue to see the presidency, power, executive leadership, and authority through a male lens, even though, Lindsay, we have female governors. Now, we don't have a lot of them, right? When you consider the 50 states. But it's interesting when it comes to the presidency, how we still view that through the lens of men, up to Obama, white men. But now he was a guy, so he's just falling into the male club.
And a lot of it is, there's been a lot of like sociology and psychology studies around this, which is it's like humans are not very imaginative. And it is really hard for us to envision things that we have not already seen. So it is really hard for us to see a female president until we've actually seen it. And I would argue that that will have a trickle-down effect in so many other industries, so many other walks of life, that like once you see women in positions of authority, whether it's, high-powered positions, doctors or lawyers or whatever, you start to think that it's possible for women to be in positions of authority. And that's the most powerful job in the world. So does the highest glass ceiling. And there have been chinks. I do think that, Hillary Clinton's campaign, while not ultimately successful, has made this potentially just a little bit easier, just a little bit. Tiny
and the
easier.
Irony is, for going back even, to Shirley Chisholm, who was the first woman to run for the presidency, certainly African-American, who made the point that even with her loss in her bid, the idea of a woman being president would probably come through the vice presidency. As opposed to what Hillary did was a direct elect.
Yeah.
In other words, I'm just gonna put my name out, I'm gonna run like others before. Yeah. But in fact, that this country, to your point about seeing a woman in the role, would probably be a little bit more into that idea, having seen the woman as vice president first. Yeah. And I take note of that in response to how some of the Republicans are looking at Kamala's role as vice president as being less than, not successful, having done nothing, invisible. So they're trying to paint again. I wish y'all could see her face. They're painting this sort of, trying to paint this covering on her that she was not there. She did nothing. They forget all the trips to Europe that she did during her 3.5 years as vice president, seeding the ground and the earth, if you will, for Ukraine and our relationships with our allies in the battle with Russia. I mean, there are just a lot of things so that we can wipe that clean. She didn't exist. So yeah, we've never had a woman in an executive role.
I should also point out that I've done a fair amount of study of the office of the vice presidency in general. And with the exception of Dick Cheney, who people felt like was way too visible as vice president for a lot of reasons, most vice presidents are invisible because per the Constitution, they don't actually have constitutional responsibilities other than having a pulse. And so, and counting, tie-breaking votes on occasion, which actually Harris has done a number of.
Right.
I think she's set the record
Yeah, she set the
for the
record.
most.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so it depends on the relationship. So of course the relationship is where actually the work gets done because the president determines like where they can be most useful. But this is a very common trope. Every single time a vice president runs, people say, "Oh, what were they doing? Where were they for the last several years?" So historically this is quite consistent, but it does take on a very interesting dynamic, which you're pointing out, that it's an attempt to make her not seem like an executive as opposed to just that, she doesn't have any experience or something like that.
How does let's say she wins beyond some obvious things when you're looking at that legacy of a John Adams presidency. What expectations do you see coming to bear? I think it's fraught with all kinds of crazy expectations, not warranted in any point in history. Would you have seen some of the things I think people will place on her? But there are some other aspects of her presidency that, in reading your book, in some respects, may mirror John Adams.
Well, I think the parallel is that, Adams was fighting against the impossible standard of Washington, and which, had a very corporal form. Harris will be fighting against the impossible standards of firstness, which is equally as impossible and sometimes is more impossible because it doesn't actually have a tangible form. It's
right.
And it's going to be one of those things where the first female president is going to have, people are going to have a lot of different views about that. There's not going to be one expectation. There's not going to be one model that you're trying to follow. It's going to be however millions of Americans we have. That's going to be the number of different types of expectations for what it means to be the first woman president. And so I think that in some ways it's almost more difficult because she's not going to even know the expectations she's up against until she fails to meet them. And she will inevitably fail. She will inevitably fail to meet them because every president fails to meet a lot of expectations. Like that is the nature of the presidency, that it is at this point, basically an impossible job, and is never more so than for someone like Obama or potentially Harris, who are in the role for the first time. And so, and she will, I have no doubt she will know that not only is she trying to be a good president for the nation and to help it through some very difficult challenges, but also whatever she does will be held against all women that come after her, which man, I don't want that job. That I do not envy her that position. No, thank you.
I know. I see your point, and I second it. I think she's going to have very much, I think, like Adams, the opportunity to make something of the presidency that is different from the one who came. In this case, the ones who came before her. Adams had the task of making the presidency different from the one, Washington, who came before him. And in that effort, put in place precedents. In the case of Adams, those norms, those processes that would lay as a foundation for how the country would move forward. Establish a precedent for a transition of power, for a president having more control over who is in or not in his, or potentially now her, cabinet. And she will likely do some of the same. But also
I love this. This is such a more positive outlook that I love this. I'm stealing this because this is actually super positive, that like her firstness is like super sort of subversive in a very fun way and can be used to create a lot of possibilities. And I love that.